Hello, and welcome to Book of the Mouse Club, episode 115, Thursday, June 26th, 2025.
Morning, monsieur.
Where are you off to?
The bookshop. I just finished the most wonderful story about a beanstalk and an ogre and
That's nice. Marie! The baguettes! Hurry up!
I'm sorry, but how can one possibly pay attention to a book with no pictures in it?
My dear child, there are a great many good books in this world without pictures.
I almost bounced clear out of the book. Some bouncing, huh?
Come home or make myself known.
J. Thaddeus Esquire. Have you never met him? You will find his story in this delightful little book, The Wind and the Willows.
I've come to return the book I borrowed.
Finished already?
Oh, I couldn't put it down. Have you got anything new?
Welcome back. I'm your host, Courtney, and I'm joined, as always, by the Slewfoot Slew to my Pecos Bill, my lovely co-host, Emily.
Hello, listeners. It is time to put on our sunscreen, wear some sunglasses, and let's kick off our 7th summer series here on Book of the Mouse Club.
Yes, it has become a beloved tradition on our show to spend the summer months diving into themed reading adventures. Since 2019, we've explored everything from the original Kingdom Keepers series to classic literature behind Disney films, as well as Disney legend memoirs and beyond. Now, in honor of Disneyland's 70th anniversary, we're launching our Celebratory Summer Series. Each month, we will focus on a book that celebrates the rich legacy of Walt's original theme park. Stay tuned to the end of the episode for our July and August picks, but today we're kicking things off with the 55ers, the Pioneers Who Settled Disneyland by David Koenig. Emily, could you share a little bit about your research behind this book?
Sure. So first about our author, and I do want to note, I did pull his bio from his Amazon author page, so I do not take any credit for the writing of this bio. David Koenig is an editorial director for 526 Media Group, Costa Mesa, California. He received his degree in journalism from California State University, Fullerton. He has contributed to or has been interviewed for articles in literally hundreds of publications, including the LA Times, New York Times, Wall Street Journal, Chicago Tribune, USA Today, Orange County Register, Orlando Sentinel, and appeared on scores of TV radio programs for ABC, NBC, CBS, CNN, all of the big names in television, the Travel Channel, many, many more. His 9 books include best-selling Mouse Tales, a behind-the-ears look at Disneyland, as well as Shooting Columbo, the lives and deaths of TV's Rumpled Detective, Unshot Columbo, Cracking the Cases That Never Got Filmed, Reality Land, True Life Adventures of at Walt Disney World, Danny Kaye, King of Jesters, Mouse Under Glass, Secrets of Disney Animation and Theme Parks, More Mouse Tales, a closer peek behind backstage at Disney, The People versus Disneyland, How Lawsuits and Lawyers Transform the Magic, and the book we're going to talk about today, The 55ers, The Pioneers Who Settled Disneyland. So safe to say his background in journalism, as well as his passion for theme parks and entertainment, has been his career and his writing focus. So if you enjoyed this book, you should go check out some of his others. He's also edited, designed, and published a number of books, including the Ultimate Edition of Randy Streckowitz's seminal Laura and Hardy, The Magic Behind the Movies, multiple Laurel and Hardy movie script books, Columbo Companion, Columbo Explains 70s, Walk in the Park, and the original Disneylander. So with our focus today on the 55ers, the Pioneers Who Settled Disneyland, this was published on October 1st, 2019 by Bonaventure Press. The book is a 288-page coffee table style book that takes you on a tour of Disneyland specifically in 1955. Not only will you visit the attractions and shops in each land, but something a little bit more unique is we also go backstage to administration buildings first erected in the original orange groves, like the White House, which were places that had original cash training centers, administration, the cash, what do they call, cash control, where they used to keep all the money, the switchboard above the Opera House, the soundstage, warehouses for supplies, wardrobe, and Frontierland. So you're not just on stage, you're also backstage. The 55ers is kind of like a yearbook, and it's celebrating over 700 cast members who are mentioned in this one year who made Walt's dream come true. Now, what does it take to be a 55er? He talks about this actually in the epilogue. I guess you call it an epilogue. It's the chapter that's 1956 and beyond. It's only about 3 pages, but he talks about the criteria and how these 55ers came to be. And the criteria has changed a bit over the years. So in 1969, Van France, who is the head of Disney University in the 1950s, he is the guy who was hired to create all of the training guides. So any cast members or people have heard of traditions, that is an origin from him. He wrote all of these guides of like how to be a cast member, how to do attractions, all of that. So he proposed starting a club to honor original cast members. At first, he had a list of about 100 names after combing through some records, but then very quickly, once he started publishing this list, many more people came out of the framework showing proof of their employment and that they should be part of this too. Uh, so he wanted this club to be a little bit more exclusive than just absolutely everyone who could have possibly worked in Disneyland. So he did come up with some original rules, which were that you had to have worked directly for the company. Leases were not included, um, and without a break for 15 years. The Club 55 was originally founded in July 1970 for the 15th anniversary, so that's its official start date. Rules then changed 1975, again, as the list continued to grow more and more and more and more, that you had to have worked directly for Disneyland, hired before the end of 1955, and stayed on as an employee till at least 1970, and could only have left the company by retirement, no firing or quitting. Van France also created the first 55er book, The Pioneers, which is where I assume David Koenig took a little bit of his title referencing the original 55er book. He also created the Golden Ears Retirement Club in 1980 and the Disney Alumni Club in 1983. So while we can thank David Koenig for this particular version of the book, we can thank Van France for getting this idea started that we should honor cast members, particularly those of the first year of Disneyland.
Yeah, I love the heritage behind that. So thank you so much for that great insight. I'd love to know also, what are your overall thoughts on this book?
It wasn't quite what I expected.
Me neither.
I was appreciative of the layout. So the way why I called it a yearbook type book.
Been referring to it as an encyclopedia.
Or that. That
Yeah.
works too. I guess not quite like a yearbook. There's not like picture and name, but in the sense that we list all of these people. And I did appreciate in the formatting that the narrative text is on the plain white part of the book paper, and then there are gray boxes behind all of the biographies. So you could approach this book in a couple ways. You could read it completely cover to cover in every single bio, or you could pick and choose, like read all the narratives and then go back and look at certain cast members. The way I kind of read it was as I picked up a couple names as I was reading the narrative, I looked for them specifically. Um, and then maybe along the way found one or two. If they had a picture next to their name, I was more likely to read them because I could actually see what they looked like. So there's a little bit of a connection draw there. Um, but I did like that it makes it a little bit more accessible because this is a dense book. For 288, it is top to bottom text.
Tiny text,
Small
giving
text.
me flashbacks to Ink and Paint where you're like, it's a coffee table, but it's also a book.
It's a textbook.
It's a textbook. Yeah, no, it was not quite what I expected either. This has been on our to be read pile since 2019,
Oh, wow.
actually. We started the show back in 2018. And then I think, we were like a year into it. And so you and I coordinated on our Christmas wish list and just threw a bunch of Disney books on there. And this was one of them. I know all of this because I needed to find my copy. And I was like, wait, did only Emily get this copy? And I made my husband pull up his Amazon orders and confirm that we bought this book. And he bought it in November of 2019. So I can assume that was a Christmas present for me. I obviously found the book. It was just on a different shelf because it is a very tall, skinny book and does not fit on the shelf with my other Disney books.
This
So
one was a little challenging to bring around to read. Like I do a lot of reading at
yeah,
the gym, on the bike, or the treadmill, and this was
it
not
was
one that I
not
could take
portable.
with me for that.
This was a
Yeah.
dedicated time, much like in campaign. I was like, I got to read 21 pages a day to finish this on time, and
Yes.
would just sit in bed or on the couch and read that while I was simultaneously reading stuff on my Kindle at work because I could not take this one for my lunch break.
But overall, I learned a lot from this book. While the narrative style wasn't always the most engaging, um, I learned a lot. Like there are a lot of things about Disneyland 1955 that I did not know. And again, it is reader friendly in the way it's laid out. The counterclockwise motion that we go around the book, through the park, the chronology is there. So it is user friendly, but I think just the density, it does, I couldn't just like sit and read for hours. I was the same. I had a pacing of how many, I was trying to do a quote chapter, so a land
Okay.
a day.
I ended up being ahead of schedule because then I was just like, well, there's only like a few more pages of white text because sometimes there would
Yeah.
just be pages and pages of people.
The longest sections I think were Adventureland and Frontierland
That is
were the
correct.
longest. Oh no, actually I think it might have been Frontierland and Main Street were
Oh,
the
Main Street was
longest.
pretty long.
Um,
Fantasyland and Tomorrowland were definitely shorter though.
yeah, I read both of those back to back. Um, so but I think encyclopedia might be a good use for this too, that as a reader, if you're really interested in just a particular part, you can go out of order and skip around this book, which I do think for an informational text it is helpful because most of the time you want to only look for a specific piece of information and you can very
Yeah.
easily find it. He has a very nice index in the back. Um, you can also tell he cited his primary sources, which as a history teacher, I was very happy to see. And I imagine this took a lot of research because it's so many interviews. And I want to know how he got all those bios. Did he write to family? Some of them I'm sure he got from interviews,
Right?
but not
Because some
everyone's
people had
alive.
passed. Yeah, no,
So
because
did he
much
reach out
like
to
in
families or?
encyclopedia at the time of publishing, it would have, the year the people were born and then a
Hmm.
dash and a closed parenthesis if they were still alive. But in the case of others, some people died like in the 70s, like the trash can guy, the
Trinidad.
little Trinidad. Yeah, he passed pretty early. So I would imagine he got in contact with family, or like if you were in contact with someone who was alive, like what can you tell me about your friend? Kind of thing.
Yeah. So overall, this book is about cast members, and I think that's an important thing in celebrating the 70th anniversary. And as a former cast member and a current cast member, we have a deep love of cast members. So I wanted to start there, and right away in the introduction, Cohen writes that he wanted to emphasize, quote, the whole cast member and not just their time, their job at Disneyland. So why do you think that was important thinking about those bios?
Yeah, I think it informs who people are. Like, yes, we show up at our jobs, but each day that we do that, you bring your personality to the role. You bring your lived experiences. And with this being mid-century, a common theme I noted as I would read various biographies is there's a lot of immigrants who are coming to California, moving there to start a new life. And I think that's found a foundation of the experience that they set out to create for their guests. So it was nice to get to know the people behind the name tag, so to speak.
There's also a lot of military,
You're right.
which makes sense for the time periods end of World War II or in the Korean War. Um, Camp Pendleton, which or is a Marine base. There's a lot of Marines that worked at Disneyland. So like not surprising when you think about the context, but I didn't connect also how many military people worked at Disneyland.
Right. I remembered reading, I think it was in the Fantasyland chapter that a lot of the military people were more like part-time
Hmm.
because they would also, still have duties
Duty.
as assigned. So then their foremen were often like 18-year-olds who were much younger than them because those were the full-time
Yeah.
workers, like fresh out of school. So
Yeah.
in a military situation where it's very hierarchical, I think the author was commenting on like it was just kind of weird for some of them to be like reporting to not a kid because 18 is
Mhm.
an adult, but your frontal lobe isn't fully formed.
But I think there's also some connection there, kind of go on a tangent. Like we always knew Walt was patriotic, and there's been countless books and stuff we read that talks about Walt being very patriotic. But thinking about how many cast members themselves are veterans and active duty at the time when
Yeah.
Disneyland opened, like that patriotism is not just coming from Walt. That's very ingrained into how Disneyland was built,
And
created,
still
run.
functions today. I mean, at both Disneyland and Magic Kingdom, they do the flag retreat ceremony each
Hmm.
day and honor veterans. I've often seen posts on LinkedIn. There are employee resource groups, and Salute is the one for veterans of the armed forces. So it's a sense of pride that continues well into roles in the present day.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. And I think that was a cool sentiment that cast members beyond just, and there were some crazy stories, which I'm going to get into a couple of them. Some of these cast members are some very interesting people. And I thought that was really nice of Cohen to want to make sure that this dedication, while we see Walt, we see some 55ers that might be familiar, Dick Nunis, Tom Nabby, who we've talked about, who become much bigger names. They weren't the emphasis of the
Agreed.
book. And I thought that was a nice perspective to read for once in a Disney
Marty
historic text.
Sklar, I noticed, was just kind of tucked in there, like in the public relations
Yeah.
piece, where I'd say he's like one of the more prolific Imagineers. So everyone seemed to be treated very equally. So let's go on our tour of Disneyland in 1955. Cohen takes us on a tour from the backstage administrative buildings to Main Street and then clockwise to Tomorrowland. Make sure you go left, just as we discussed with Danielle in her I Love Disney's Magic Kingdom. So that's the pathway that we are going to talk about. Let's pick one cast member from each land that we'd like to highlight whose stories we'd enjoy. Do you want to kick us off with the groves? So, of course, before they built anything, there were trees, there were orange groves, and we start right there.
So I wasn't going to, the people I picked, or the person I picked, um, is not one of the original Orange Grove sellers, but I do appreciate that he took time to acknowledge every family who sold their land.
Yeah, that was super
Um,
interesting to me because that was not something I had a lot of knowledge of.
yes, so I thought that was very cool. Um, One guy I want to talk about was a driver, David Daniel Barchard. He spent all of his life in California, and he worked on one of the farms. Oh, was it? Yeah, he worked in the orchards, and then when Disney bought the land, he kind of stayed on in the construction crew and drove trucks around, just like delivering supplies around the construction site. And he got to know Walt really well, and Walt would just like flag him down to get a ride around the construction site of building Disneyland. So I like to this image of him just like driving Walt around work, in the dirt and the dust and the craziness, and like how much he also knew the land from working on it as an orange grove. But also from his story that they talked about so much, I think his story also gives us a big glimpse into the backstage life. So he talks about he calculated that he pumped over 3,000 gallons of gasoline a day, over 14 million gallons in his first 20 years of working there, of just delivering supplies. So just the scope of also understanding what goes into running Disneyland, even a theme park in the 1950s. Like I can only imagine the resources we use now on some of these attractions. But you don't remember that, like, yeah, there's a guy who's got to deliver all the gasoline to Autopia.
Yeah.
There's a guy who's got to make sure that the engines are running in the Jungle Cruise ships, and I liked his bio.
Moving into Town Square, just before our guests get to Main Street, the biggest focus there that jumped out to me was the ticket sellers. These women were often the first cast member that a guest would encounter. Back then, you had to buy your ticket to the park as well as your ticket books, and they were the ones who kind of had to explain, like, this is a ticket book, these are the attractions, let's go about planning your day. And I loved there's a picture on page 55 with a reunion of the ticket sellers in May 1990. There are several of them still there. But looking through that chapter, many of the photos featured Della E. Ground Stratham. So I'm assuming they were from her personal collection. But just as I was
Yes.
reading, looking at the pictures, I was like, all right, definitely got to check out Della's biography there. At the time of publication, she was listed as still living, having been born in 1923. Would love to know personally if she made it to her 100th birthday. But yeah, just a nice story. It says on a whim to earn a little spending money during her 2 week stay, she got a job as a nurse at Santa Ana Community Hospital. She wound up staying for 18 months through the birth of her daughter. So shout out to her being a single mom. There's context there. She had a 3 paragraph long entry, but yeah, single mom who just ended up going to work for Disneyland because one of her patients was helping to build the pharmacy, and he was like, "You should probably work at Disneyland." And she's like, "Psh, that's gonna be a glorified carnival. I don't want to do that." And he's like, "No, I'm telling you, you should do it." And she went on to work there up until 1970. At that point, she had wed one of her coworkers, and he was going to relocate to Florida to be a maintenance manager for the Magic Kingdom. So she had it ease. I would also just love to know, what happened to her in the East
Yeah,
Coast. It
once they
really,
got used.
I feel like that could have benefited from additional context, because I'm assuming this is someone that David really talked to, since there were so many photos of her. Like, it ends on July 25th, 1970. Della retired from Disneyland and a week later left for the East Coast. I'm like, okay, but did she work for Disney on the East Coast? I'm assuming not. That probably would have been mentioned. But I would have liked a little more, despite that being a 4 paragraph entry. I don't know. Now I'm like, I live in Florida. Was she my neighbor? Like, where
Hmm.
did she end up? I learned Dick Nunes lived like 2 miles from me when we did that book. I'm
Yeah,
like, we
right.
probably shop at the same Publix. I'm gonna keep my eyes out. He did sadly pass a few months after we did that book, but I was really like, I drive past the entrance to that very fancy community when I go to the library, so I know exactly where that is. So I don't know, just a fun connection there. But let's move into Main Street. Who have you picked there?
I do want to say, I noticed as we get further, like we have Della Ground Strathman, but it got harder and harder to pick out women as we
Once
kept
you're
going
in the
around the
park,
park.
yeah.
They are predominantly in the front of the park in, they say, tickets.
And they mentioned the TWA rocket to the moon had like they were going for like the flight attendant stewardess vibe. So
Yeah.
that was one of the
But there are
few
very
all
few
women.
attractions. Golden Horseshoe, which we'll get to, had some performers, the TWA, but overall, like much of Fantasyland attractions,
Yeah.
Jungle Cruise, Frontierland, was all staff, male cast members. So it was interesting to see that very 1950s gender role vibe. Um,
Yes.
and then to see how we transition out of that, or just with our experiences where there's people everywhere.
No, I appreciate
Um,
that observation.
but I did notice that as I was trying to pick people, that I was like, I feel like I'm picking a lot of guys, but then I was looking through, I was like, there's not many
Most of these
women as I
guys.
get further around the park. So I thought that
I
was
should have done
interesting.
a data analysis from the index.
Oh
That would have
goodness.
been lengthy.
So on Main Street was a great chapter. I
A long
really
one.
enjoyed Main Street. I think there's some, we can get to that later. I think there's some juice in there about
Yes, we will unpack that in a
some
bit.
interesting things. I had a hard time picking. I kind of have three people. Vesey Walker was the original conductor of the Disneyland band, and just his description totally made me think of the Music Man.
Yeah.
I was like, he spent his whole career before Disneyland putting together boys bands, at colleges and towns and whatnot, and a little different than Professor Harold Hill. He's not necessarily, it sounded like the friendliest of people. He was very strict and rigid in how he wanted to do things. Some of the musicians were like curious how good of a musician he himself actually was, because he only had one way of conducting and one way of, it was marches or nothing, it sounded like. Um, but he had some really interesting stories, and the Disneyland band is so much part, like I can't imagine Disneyland or Disney World without the band, especially on Main Street. So I thought he was a good person to mention. We mentioned Trinidad earlier. I just thought he got a whole page.
Yeah, he got
He
it. I
is
was like,
white text.
ooh.
He's not an encyclopedia bio. He had an entire
What a sweetie pie. The first official unofficial character
unofficial.
meet and greet of,
And I love that
Disney.
Walt was like, he was fired by his supervisor. I forget why, for being late or something. And Walt came in and was like, "You do not fire that man."
His role was pooper scooper, basically,
Yeah,
behind the
follow the Main
horses
Street vehicles
on
and
Main Street, but just did it with a smile. People liked taking pictures with him. But I also thought it was so charming. Immigrant story, does not speak a lot of English, basically just
Mhm.
would say hello. I liked the story that on his birthday, they would like announce birthdays because it was such a community in the early days, and they sang happy birthday to him, and he
And he
like
didn't
didn't
know.
know it was for him. And I was like, oh, Trinidad. He was only there like what for like
two
a
years,
few
two or three
years,
years.
yeah, but made quite an impact to
And
get a
even on
whole
Walt, Walt
page.
said the next day to the supervisor, either he's back or
Or
you're
you're gone.
fired.
Yeah.
And Trinidad was back to work. And his picture is so precious of him on Main Street with the castle in the back and his push cart. And I loved that. But another immigrant story that I thought was special because I didn't realize that the silhouette cutouts had been part of Disneyland since day one.
Hmm.
Um, and
The ones that like you get your profile
yeah,
and then it's on
which
like
I
a
don't know how
matted
people do that.
frame.
That is such a skill. Uh,
I can't even cut a straight line.
you didn't pass
I
kindergarten.
didn't know, but this is a subject in my home that I have terrible fine motor skills. So
But they have Alexander de Goslar's story. He is immigrant from Budapest, Hungary. He moved just realized the danger of being Jewish in pre-World War Germany. He left in the 1930s. And when he came to the United States, he worked in lots of places like Coney Island. He did county fairs, numerous World's fairs. So I feel like he circulated in those places that Walt loved innovation, creativity, telling diverse cultural stories, using those talents. And that's where Walt found him and he came to work in Disneyland and then he found friends and he helped create a community of people who continued this art form that today I don't know many people outside of boardwalks and Disneyland really that I've ever seen do that. So he kept that going. And he even had TV shows in the Mickey Mouse Club, an Adventure in Art episode of Disneyland in 58, and he appeared in the Mickey Mouse Club in 1963, and then continued to travel on behalf of Disney, doing silhouette cutouts in different expositions and stuff. So I thought he had a really cool story as well.
let's move on to Adventureland. And I wanted to focus on four people, but they are all interconnected, and that would be the Evans brothers, who were responsible for landscaping, as well as their wives who got to have their own shop in Adventureland. So these brothers are Alfred Morgan Evans and John William Evans, brothers who were born among wealth within the Pasadena area, but the Great Depression hit, destroyed their father's business. So like they quit school and they began selling exotic plants from their father's home nursery. So they really became the go-to people for like funky tropical plants that stars would want in their homes, for their backyards, their gardens. So what do you need for Adventureland? You need plants, and Walt knew where to go to get them. Really just want to unpack here with Alfred, who also went by Bill, which I'm really not sure why because his middle name is Morgan. But Bill, we'll call him Bill now. Just want to unpack Bill here because there is a picture of him in high school, which says a picture with his soon to be wife Jane, but his girlfriend from high school at the time, Gloria Stewart, who is the old lady from Titanic. She's the it's been 84
Oh my
years.
gosh.
Yeah, I'm gonna read that whole caption because it's amazing. It says Bill Evans grew up surrounded by movie stars. Shown here in the 1930s, he cavorts with his girlfriend from high school, actress Gloria Stewart, and his soon-to-be wife Jane. According to Bill's son Pete, in her 80s, Gloria came out of retirement to get re-famous in Titanic. I saw the movie with my dad, and he exclaimed to know the actress, but not until the end credits came out did he know for sure? It had been something like 60 years since he had seen her. They reconnected and became friends again for life. She had become a bookbinder, and we lived in West LA. And I'm like, I love that. He just went to see Titanic. He's like, that lady looks kind of familiar. Oh, right, it's my high school girlfriend. So sorry, that was just a fun fact that was unexpectedly in the book.
They were fascinating to me because like they were kind of troublemakers
Oh,
in a sense.
yeah.
Like their wives would that ran
They would go to lunch
their
for
yeah,
like
like they would just
90
disappear.
minutes.
They kind
Bang.
of not to sound I don't know how to quite equate this, but like kind of like the DCP cast members who they very clearly only took the job to be able to go to Disneyland for free, and they would like
Okay.
always trade away all of their shifts,
Gotcha.
kind of thing. It's like they just wanted to say they worked at Disneyland for the sake of just being able to go to Disneyland
Yeah, it
every
was a
day.
whole family thing because their wives were, as we already mentioned, Jane Brown Everson Evans, and then the other wife was Claire Chapman Evans, and they just had like a little tropical traders booth that had like straw hats and stuff. And I guess they're like, somebody else can sell them. We're just gonna hang out at Disneyland. So you know
I
what?
do
Good
want to
for
give a
them.
shout out to someone who worked with them. So it sounded like the brothers' talent was really in procuring these plants and like kind of bringing
Yes.
Walt's vision to life, even though they themselves are not good landscapers, but they excelled particularly in Adventureland, where landscaping didn't have to be manicured or sculpted. It was meant to be wild and crazy, and they had a lot of connections to get exotic plants and grow them. But I want to bring up Ruth Shellhorn, who when they were getting down to like, hey, where are we on this timeline? They're like, oh, we are really behind in like the rest of the landscaping of the park. They're like, we need to bring in somebody. And I feel bad for Ruth Shellhorn because it sounds like other than, I mean, this is the only book I have read or heard of her, that she really tried and just the management styles between the Evans brothers and her and how to get the landscaping done was just not a conducive partnership. And he Cohen cites evidence from her diary of like her just being incredibly frustrated with the two of them, and the landscaping didn't come out the way she wants. She ends up leaving not very long after the opening of Disneyland, or even slightly before. Um, I'm trying to find skimming real quick, but she didn't stay very long. And sadly, I think she doesn't get like really any credit
No.
for the work that she did do in the landscaping. And Disneyland is known, and we've heard stories of the Disneyland landscaping of like they used weeds and put the Latin names just to make them
Yes, in
sound
Tomorrowland. I
um
like that story.
exotic or something. And I didn't know if maybe that was the Evans brothers or her, but I felt for her that, she came in, she tried, she was one of the boys. She's credited as being in a role that did not have any other women in it.
Mhm.
And she struggled. So I think she just deserves a shout out for doing what she could. She did get a lot done. I acknowledge that she struggled.
Yeah, who jumped out to you from Frontierland? I do have one in mind, if you're okay if I go for it.
Sure.
Mine was Glenda Nancy
She's
Guilfoyle.
great.
Oh my gosh. Okay, so she's a can-can dancer at the Golden Horseshoe, of which there were, I think, five of them or so. I liked that they all carpooled. They just lived
Yes.
near each other and they're like, we're just gonna carpool together because they all just had the same shifts and when Disneyland was closed, that was their day off. But of them, again, really drawn to the people who did have accompanying photos in the book because you cannot miss this picture of Glenda performing as a Vegas showgirl well into her 70s. She holds the Guinness Book of World Records as the world's oldest showgirl. So, she started as a can-can dancer at Disneyland. Um, she also was a rockette, and she's just like dancing is what I want to do with my life. And she was an elite dancer with long legs and a beautiful face, according to David Koenig. So good for her, living the dancer's dream, doing it well into her 70s and looking just as fabulous.
So one guy with a crazy story that stood out to me was Raul Ator Costanza. He's literally a jewel thief. And I thought
Crazy.
this was crazy. Like working in Frontierland, and like you are the guy on the train with the bank robbery, like literal bank robbery, stolen jewels. Uh, like it's insane. He had a tough childhood, fell into some issues, but had a lot of experience in the restaurant industry and then served in the army. After that is when the burglary ring with the jewel thieves and whatnot, he had over $25,000 in stolen jewels and another $150,000 in jewelry and furs that they acquired throughout the West. I was like, this is literally Frontierland, like Wild West guy in the contemporary times. And then he went on to be the first general manager of Casa de Fritos. And I just thought that's crazy. The story, I was just like, I would not expect that. And I just thought his story was interesting. And I also really wish I could have eaten at Casa de Fritos at some point.
Frontierland had some cool stuff going on. I really appreciated the attention to
Yeah.
Native American heritage. And these
Yes.
were often people who, they were proud to demonstrate their heritage. They were often cast in villainous roles, so to speak, in Western films in Hollywood at the time. But here, I got the sense from, as Dave Coeing described it, that it initially came from a place of respect. Walt wanting them to, do some of their rituals and invite the visitors into that, what was supposed to be an authentic experience. And that's something I didn't realize that Disneyland had at the time.
Yeah, I had no clue that this was here. And I also thought it was interesting. Throughout the book, he talks about a number of cast members who all worked in various parts of Hollywood. And this is kind of an extension of all of those different industries coming together. Uh, but what was called the Indian Village was able to employ so many actors and give them more work. Because many Native people went into working in Hollywood because Westerns became a lucrative genre. Um, and unfortunately, stereotype casting, but it was income. It was a job. Uh, but yeah, I found that really interesting. And he does mention quite a few people, including Louis B. Shooting Star Heminger, Ronald Spencer Heminger, Foster Edgar Hood, Ansel Wallace, Eddie Little Sky Little, as well as Riley Bruce. There's a lot of Native American words that I'm not going to attempt to say out of respect for I will completely butcher them. But Riley Bruce Sunrise as well. And there's some great pictures in here. And I found that fascinating. And I think one story that stood out to me on that was Walt Disney wanted a chief. And he's like, you guys should talk amongst yourselves, like who will be the chief of our village. And they're like, we don't need to talk. He's the oldest. Therefore, he's
That's
the
it.
elder. And
Yeah.
they said Walt was just like fascinated by how they use their culture to bring together their section of the park. And Walt was very like thinking bureaucratically, how do you run a business? And they're like, this isn't a business. This is tradition and culture. And they said Walt was taken by that. And I thought that was cool.
Yeah, over in Fantasyland, as you mentioned, not many women as we get into the later chapters, but one to highlight is Della Marie Sherwood Taylor. She was married to Merv, the magician, who ran the magic shop. And I also did not realize that the iconic magic shop, which I knew to be on Main Street as it resides today, originated in Fantasyland, but it didn't get a lot of
Yeah.
foot traffic because it was kind of tucked away behind the castle and people just didn't think it was an actual shop. But really unique description applied to her. They said, quote, she was the Roy Disney to Merv being Walt, end quote. So kind of the business and brains behind her husband's magical whims.
I thought that was really cool. And it was quite a family endeavor when you look at all of the names of the people who originated that magic shop. They're all family, which
Yeah.
I thought was interesting. And they had multiple shops. Last person to highlight, and again, this is just for listeners, there's hundreds of people
Tip of the
mentioned in here.
iceberg.
Tip of the iceberg here. There are many fascinating stories, and just for sake of time is why we're only highlighting one or two people per land. But someone I wanted to bring up in Tomorrowland, first, is this one where I had to? I was torn between two people. Oh, I was torn between two people. I'm going to mention both because they're short.
Sure, go ahead.
John Lewis Cantone is actually the second K7 spaceman, but he really made the character who he was.
The
And
other guy was like, it's too hot. I hate this.
it's a 66-pound
No idea it was that heavy.
suit. And yeah, not cool that the helmet was a legit plastic orb. They said they actually had to pump oxygen into
Oxygen.
it.
The kid like snapped her
And
focus.
he's like, oh, I can't breathe. I also thought it was funny that people would try to tip them and they're not supposed to accept tips, but they're like, hey, why not? And they would just shove
I
it
think
into
typically in the industry, like the rule would be like if someone insists 3 times, you're like, okay, fine.
but I found it funny that in already heavy costume, they were like fitting bills and
Stuffing
coins
bills.
and like weighing themselves down even more. But I thought he had a great story of how he created that character and made it who he was. He brought a little girl around the park who lost her
For
family.
like 2 hours. This is what
Yeah,
happens when you don't
Disneyland
have
is not
cell
that large,
phones.
especially
No.
in 1955. Like, parents,
Where'd they
where's your kid?
go?
But there's some really great pictures of him, and I feel like pictures of early Disneyland, that's a pretty iconic photo, and I didn't know who the guy was, and now
Yeah.
I do. So I wanted to talk about him. And then I also wanted to bring up Arthur Dean Nerith of the Sound Shop because I know something we marvel at so much in Disney in general is how they do their background loops and like the full environment experience, the smellizers and the scents. But he was like the one man guy for a while of how to do all the audio around the parks, including background loops on Main Street, parade, music, etc. So a lot of the immersion that we love so much about Disney, he is one of the early creators, and I thought he deserved a shout out.
Yeah, great picks. Again, this was just a very high level. Some folks that stood out to us as we read through, but that really is the heart of this book. There are over 700 entries. So we encourage you, should you pick up this book, to dive into the areas that interest you most.
So now let's talk about the park itself. So we met some people as we went around the park. Uh, what are some new things you learned about this park that really surprised you? Because this really takes us, we don't even talk about Black Sunday in this. Like the opening
No.
day is not even part of this. So I feel like we got to learn some different things about the opening of Disneyland.
Yeah, I think for me, I was really surprised, particularly in the Main Street chapter, just how many leases there were among Main Street because I did not visit Disneyland until its 50th anniversary. That was my first visit. I went back for the 60th and some subsequent visits since then. But to me, I'm just like, it's the Emporium. It basically goes all the way down to the street, then the Penny Arcade, the restaurant. Um, the ice cream parlor. Now there's a Starbucks. I just most things are owned by Disney at this point, outside of probably the Starbucks and the Magic Shop. But back then, basically everything on Main Street was owned
Yeah.
by these
Well, even
independent
other lands.
retailers. Yeah, just Main Street is where like it felt most prominent. But yes, the
Hmm.
Shacks in Adventureland throughout the Magic Shop, as we mentioned, and Fantasyland. But like that was I feel like a lot of Main Street, the stories were not people who would be defined as later on Club 55 because they were
Yeah.
not hired by Disneyland. Like I knew the Wizard of Braz shop. That's like a fun Disney fact that I've known for a long time.
Yeah.
I knew Bank of America was there, but just even like the tiniest of little shops, like you said, the Silhouette Cutter, all of that was third party, and just how stuff went down to kind of eventually kick them out once Disneyland became more profitable. Like they were necessary at the start of Disneyland to help fund it. Um, but otherwise,
Yeah,
once
that
they
one's
were funded, they're like,
that was
okay,
one
you're
that
not being
surprised
renewed.
me. I think also the most of just how many outside people, like we knew Disney had sponsors, but like you said, how many outside people were involved in Disneyland. One thing that really took me was um, there were lots of mentions to Knott's Berry Farm, which I
Yeah.
will admit I know very little of Knott's Berry Farm other than it exists and it's a berry farm and it's a theme park that I didn't realize was older than Disneyland, and it is.
Yeah.
Um, but there's lots of mentions of things that Disney, I don't know if this is coming from Cohen and his interpretation or if this was actually documented like Disney knew this. But there are a lot of things I don't want to say copied, but they were like, that works at Knott's Berry Farm. We should do that too.
We're gonna have jam.
Yeah, the Sunnyview Farms jam. The newspapers that people could buy personalized newspapers, like the Disneyland newspaper of the day. They were like, oh, we could actually upsell at that if we're like, if you want a personalized one, and they would add a story of like Emily visits Disneyland today,
Very cute.
which is a great souvenir. But Knott's Berry Farm did that. They actually sent the Disney printer to Knott's Berry Farm to learn how to do the personalization to bring it back to Disneyland. Um, the glass blowing, was something that they knew was popular at Knott's Berry Farm, so he wanted to get a glass blower as well. I just didn't realize how many things I think we give Disney sometimes, I don't want to say too much, maybe too much credit for being like the originator of the modern theme park. When
Yeah.
there are plenty of other theme parks who were doing similar
Smaller.
things
We'll call them amusement parks.
that just didn't, and that was very interesting to me of
No,
the influence of other parks
that's fair.
also had on
Was
Disney.
there something in Disney uh that you didn't realize had been part of the park since 1955, like that's still around today?
I mentioned the silhouettes. I also didn't realize how early the Mickey balloons were. I knew they were early, but I didn't realize they were like
They went all
1955.
the way back.
I thought they came a little later because I do remember the story of how they came up with the dome because the balloons would pop so easily. And it was someone else, I forget his name, that came up with the dome that we see now that it's the two balloons in one. Um, but I didn't realize that the balloons, and I thought that was a fun story of all of these kids that would sell balloons, and that was like a step up from selling the newspapers. And it was kind of like how people grow through the company. Young kids, surprising how many kids worked at Disneyland. Now I know like child labor laws are not what they are now, but like there's a lot of kids between the newspaper boys, the balloons. You were allowed to work if you weren't handling food, 16, 15 or 16, if you weren't handling
Yes.
food. So there were a lot of part-time jobs that were available for kids. Um, but yeah, sorry, I got a little
No,
off
that's
topic there.
okay.
So the glass blowing, I think a lot of it had to do with the art that I think we're used to seeing around Disneyland. I didn't realize was there originally. What about you?
Nothing really jumped out to me, and I think that's just I had a different approach to reading this. I was more interested in the stuff that's not there anymore. Like that's more
Yeah.
what retains in my brain. And I don't know, maybe it's because I'm not trying to sound like, oh, I got to do all the like I went to Disneyland well before you got to go to
Hmm.
Disneyland. And maybe just when I went there for the 50th, it was very big on the heritage. And so there were certain attractions that had like a golden car, like there was a golden Dumbo, a golden Peter Pan ride vehicle. So it was very clear what had been there for 50 years when I went, and that really stuck out to me. So I saw you wrote this question that I was like, I don't know that there was anything that surprised me. I was more like, oh man, they took that away. Like, or wow, that's crazy. There's a Hall of Chemistry where they're just like, we mix chemicals and it's Monsanto, and we're just gonna not really talk about that ever again.
Oh wait, can I mention one that surprised
Yeah, of
me?
course.
Fantasyland used to have this giant pirate ship that sold tuna
Yes, and
sandwiches.
see, I knew
And it was
about
there
that.
till the
So,
80s.
yeah,
That did not know.
I've seen that in footage.
I totally missed that.
Chicken of the Sea.
And I just find that crazy. And they had an actual veteran who had sadly lost his leg be a peg leg
Yeah, and he
pirate.
was a pig leg. I was like, oh my God. I guess you could just do that back then.
Yes.
At
Um,
least the Native American chapter was very much like this came from a place of respect. And the other one was like, "I just made him a pirate." It's
I
fine, don't worry.
don't know. But
Look, good for him.
but the
As
fact
long
that
as
they
he
said
was
for many
happy.
people it was their first time having a tuna sandwich, and I'm like, that is so
Wild to me.
common to me, but
Yeah.
maybe canned tuna, that was just a very new.
I hate tuna, but I like
Really?
ahi tuna. But I hate canned tuna
So
and
like
I hate the
sushi
smell.
tuna, you're all about.
Sushi tuna, yes. Cooked tuna,
So you're not going to
no.
Columbia Harbor House and getting the tuna sandwich.
No, I'm getting the fish and chips
Fair.
for sure.
The tuna sandwich is one of my mom's favorites, and Caitlin, my DCP roommate, that was one of her favorite go-tos in the
No.
park.
Well, then they
They
would have
would love the
liked the
chicken
chicken of sea.
But
Captain
like,
Hook
I'm trying to
should have.
imagine Fantasyland.
You
It
gotta look
was
up
demolished in the 80s with
pictures.
the
Yeah,
new
yeah.
Fantasyland redo, but like the dark rides are still there.
It takes up a big chunk. Like
Yeah.
you can find some aerial shots online for sure.
But I was like, there's a giant pirate ship in the
And a
back of
pig leg guy.
Fantasyland. Crazy. All right. So after your tour, specifically 1955, which land do you most want to visit in the original Disneyland?
Honestly, I feel like Frontierland has a lot
Why are
going
we the
on for
same
it. We had
person?
I thought about this and I was like, Fantasyland feels like the most the same to me in my
Hmm.
brain. Like the dark rides are largely unchanged. And I just all of the entertainment in Fantasyland is I feel like something that has been lost to time, like Black Bart and the sheriff just doing like dueling gun shows
Yeah.
and the Golden Horseshoe performances and the Native American tribe. Like
Yeah.
I just feel like Frontierland has probably changed
The
the
most.
most. And
And it
so
was
that's why I'd want to
huge.
go.
There's a pony
Yes.
farm.
You could ride pack mules if they wanted to move. We learned
Yeah.
about sometimes they were stubborn as a mule. Uh,
But yeah, I would
Nature's
agree.
Wonderland. I want to ride and see the
We're
Rainbow
the same
Caverns.
person.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Tomorrowland, as much as I love it for my own
Space
connection, I
wasn't
was
there
like,
yet.
there's just not much going on there. I don't know that there's
It's
I would go to Tomorrowland in the 60s because like the Adventures Through Inner Space has always been interesting to me, but that wasn't there in 55, and that's what we're talking about, and I don't need to go to the Monsanto Hall of Chemistry. I'm
yeah, we want
good.
to see the house,
Yes, the
not the
house. That's the
precursor to the
60s though.
house. I agree with you. Frontierland mostly just for so many things that are gone. I guess that's something else that surprised me. I think I assumed that there were Disney characters in the parks in the 1950s because we had characters that showed up to movie premieres from
Yeah,
Snow White
well before
onward,
that.
but no costumed character like Disney characters. Like you
They
couldn't
did,
meet
yes.
Mickey Mouse in
Wild.
1955, and I was looking for
They showed
those.
up on the Black Sunday, but they're from the Ice Capades. And if you have ever looked at that photo, it's terrifying.
Yeah.
Like that's my sleep paralysis demon. It's Mickey Mouse on opening day
That's hysterical.
of Disneyland.
But I was really surprised by that, and I agree with you that as someone who used to work in entertainment, I think it's the live entertainment and those cast member
Yeah.
interactions that really bring Disney to life, and that's what would draw me to Frontierland as well.
Was there any photos in the book that you particularly enjoyed? I think this was such a nice touch with them being such rare photos, often from personal collections.
So I mentioned the Chicken in the Sea. That one, I was just like, wow, that is a ship. Um, we mentioned the Native American village. That one stood out to me. The Aunt Jemima kitchen.
Yeah.
I was happy to see we didn't shy away from bringing that up. Um,
No, I think this book is, I will give it to its credit, very transparent about
yeah. But
time.
I feel like because it's not brought up too much, was
You
happy to
didn't really know
see
about that
some
yet.
pictures. Oh, there is one picture. Sorry, we talked about costume characters on page 208 across from Aunt Jemima's kitchen. I guess because there's a celebrity that day, there is a Mickey riding in the
Is it scary?
it is Scary Mickey.
No,
Right.
it's not Scary Mickey. That is not my sleep paralysis demon.
Oh,
Can
never mind.
confirm.
Um,
That is that looks like that was like maybe later. That's Friendly Mickey.
Friendly Mickey.
I am going to send you a picture of creepy Mickey before you go to bed, and I hope you enjoy that.
I did really enjoy. Oh no, that one was. Why do I have a picture of Walt Disney World, Magic Kingdom, not Disneyland?
I think somebody ended up there.
Um, some of the interiors of the stores I thought
No,
were
they're just
interesting because it's
nice.
so different.
Like the
Um,
Pendleton store, just
yeah, because it's so different than what we see now in Disneyland. Like it was legit shopping. Like buy a dress, buy a
you could
suit.
have a custom made reversible plaid skirt from Pendleton. That was a hot ticket item that Walt went and had made for one of his daughter's birthdays or Christmas.
Yeah. So I think a lot of the store interiors were really interesting to me. There's many of like the Curio Hut in Adventureland just because they look so different than what we see today.
I'd agree.
Um, the Jam Store. Yeah, I think the store interiors really got me because they just look so different. Oh, the Apothecary?
Yeah.
Kind of a museum-ish. Kind of wild to me that they said that all these people would show up at the Upjohn Pharmacy and would ask for like first aid stuff like, do you have Band-Aids? Do you have I don't know what if Advil existed then, etc. And they were like, no, you gotta go to first aid. I was like, why not just move first aid
To
to
the
the
pharmacy.
pharmacy and then just have a room in the back for something that maybe requires more attention? Because that would have been great, but they just like showcase pharmacy items that you couldn't buy there.
Were
Very
there
interesting.
any costumes that jumped out to you that you're like, "Ooh, I'd like to wear that"?
Yes. I think very much like today, um, the costumes for the people who worked in what would be the Emporium, like Main Street. But I did also very much like the waitress outfit, maybe just because it's very 1950s with like the Peter Pan collars and the flouncy skirts. The waitresses at Golden Horseshoe also I feel like
Not
had a really pretty
a
outfit.
1955 thing, but did get mentioned in the book that the spaceman was joined by a space girl, and I would want to be space girl.
Yes.
Her
Was
outfit's
that in
really
the
cute.
70s,
60s,
60s?
60s, yeah.
Oh,
Space
his
Girl
character
has
the character persisted, I think, through the
Yeah, they
80s.
took away the sponsorship from Kaiser, so they removed like the K7 insignia, but yeah, he walked around and it alluded to it was like, and he was joined by Space Girl, and I was like, I've seen pictures of Space Girl, I want to be Space Girl.
Yeah,
But
some
also
of
shout out to Disneyland's first wardrobe hire, Rennie Connolly. People called her like Mama, and she would like just listen to people. The TWA stewardesses for the Rocket to the Moon were like, "We hate our costumes," and she's like, "I can fix that for you and make you feel like women." So
I also
she
thought
just
this
seemed like a gem.
um which wardrobe used to be behind Fantasyland. I think that's something too that as I don't know if I can say I'm a recent cast member, but and how I understand
It's 10
Disney
years.
today. Yeah, 10 years for me this summer since I was a cast member. Um, how many people they work directly in the park? Like the switchboard is still there above the Opera House. Wardrobe was in Frontierland. And so many people mentioned like their office was above this shop, was
Yeah.
behind this. Like they were directly in the park. Whereas now I feel like we have the casting building, we have backstage areas, like things that are a little bit more away from operations. Um,
Yeah.
Disney University, where like we had traditions,
No, like it's in an old house out back. It's crazy to me too that they just literally moved people's houses. Like I don't
like on a forklift, just like
understand.
pick them up
Yes,
and move
I
them.
don't understand how you do that, but I
It
know it's
can
a
be
thing.
done.
I've seen footage, but I'm like, you just picked up somebody's house. They're like, this is Disney University now.
But I just find that fascinating how many people like their offices and their day-to-day life, like counting money, doing the accounting. You're above this random shop.
I forgot the context, but somebody went into one of the houses that had become an office and was like, I used to party here, like as a
Oh
teenager.
my
Like that was one of
gosh.
the she's like, wait a second, I've been here before,
I
but
know this house,
I
but it
know
was two blocks that way.
this was a living room, but now it's somebody's office.
I did like, sorry to go back to Renee Connolly. I can only imagine like she was brought in before, like almost a year before Disneyland opened, and she had to come up with costumes and sizing,
Yeah.
like so many different sizes for people she hasn't hadn't met yet, people who weren't even hired, lands that weren't even created. They were just like keep coming up with stuff, and she made over 100 different
An unsung
costumes,
hero.
which I thought was pretty cool. Now, I kind of want to. There's a cast member who permeates much of this story. Cornelius Vanderbilt Wood, or
What a
CV,
name.
CV Wood. And I want to talk about him because he's one of the few people outside of Walt who consistently pops up throughout the book and became a big part of the epilogue of the 1956 and beyond. So, what did you think of him and his story? Do you want me to give
He's
some
he's
context?
kind of the villain
Yes. Okay, we had the
of
same
this
impression.
story. Yeah, but I don't feel like he got introduced that way, but then as this narrative unfolded, I was like, "Oh, he was doing some shady things with
Yes.
the leases and getting a slice of the pie for himself." And once Walt caught on, he was like, "Get out."
Yeah, so CV, he was brought in. He was good at management and planning things. Eventually, he will own his own own company, Marco Engineering. He helped develop Disneyland, and a big part of his job was to attract investors and to hire people like we need people to build Main Street, find a contractor to do that. He was the guy that found the different contracts and would help negotiate those. And to his credit, he does help get Disneyland off the ground. But where things start to sour, there's in the page 50 to 60, 59 to 60, they talk about that scandal of how he kind of manipulated some of the leases to pocket some of the money, um, manipulate some of the merchandise that ended up on the shelves. And then what soured Walt, they kind of kept him because they needed the money and he was good at finding the investors. But it just seems like over time, a lot of those small things, and CV would just pop up a lot, that a lot of people got their jobs because they knew him or knew someone who knew him. Um, but then he started taking a lot of credit as I'm the developer of Disneyland, and Walt was
They
not
sued
happy.
him. They're like, cease and desist. You cannot make that claim.
Yeah, quite a lot happening there. But what I find interesting is he decides to quit the day before his firing date.
Yeah.
And the day before he goes, I'm parting ways on good terms to go start my own company, which then later his own company would create Freedom Land USA in New York City, Pleasure Island in Wakefield, Massachusetts, and Six Flags Over Texas in Arlington,
Wow.
Texas, which is now a huge
Thing.
amusement park chain. Um, so he does have a knack for and is a big name in the theme park world. But I found that so interesting. It says here, I'm looking at his Wikipedia page just to get a condensed
Summary.
summary because he's throughout the book. This says here, quote, longtime employee Bob Gurr, who was loyal to the Disney, said Wood was a con man. And Van Arsdale France believed that the relationship would not survive because Wood and Disney were both fiercely independent. Yeah, so Wood wanted to be able to get these contracts and negotiate
Yeah.
things, and
He
Walt was
was
like, you got to clear it.
essential, but didn't end too well for him. Let's talk about Walt, though. You know, I think that's a good place to end our discussion of this book. He's employee number one of Disneyland. What is something that you learned about Walt after reading about him, from the perspective of these various cast members?
So something I picked up from Walt, kind of an expansion on something we've read about him numerous times before, is that he had a knack of bringing people into roles that they didn't think they were capable of, like Bob Gurr, who never thought he could design automobiles and cars and all these ride vehicles. Like that wasn't something he thought he could do, or animators who become Imagineers. But I think that relationship also worked within the theme park as well. So many cast members who didn't think that they would stay or that, you know, they decided to move throughout the company. It just sounds like from the cast member perspectives who talked about Walt, like our guy who, David Daniel Barchard, who drove, the gasoline trucks, that Walt just had a personality and a chemistry with everyone. And I think it was endearing to see that come down to people who worked in operations and not those who ended up getting their windows on Main Street.
Yeah. I think the thing I took from it was a little bit more of Walt's business acumen. We often
Mm.
think of, I mean, I used the quote to describe the woman in Fantasyland, but like Roy was more of the business person and Walt's the dreamer, the doer.
Yeah.
But the way that these contract terminations were framed was often like Walt wanted them out. And that was just an
Yeah.
interesting perspective that I hadn't considered. And it very much came down to who he liked because the Pendleton store stayed there till the 90s because that was like his favorite store. He's like, I'm gonna kick these other people out of Main Street, but you guys can stay. Don't worry about it. Or I think it's Don Tatum, who had a shop, but it was like, no, like we're cool. You you can stick around. I was like, oh,
Yeah.
interesting. Like that was just, I think,
Those
a more
values
like,
of loyalty definitely
yeah,
come through. And I wonder though if a lot of that had to do with CV Wood too. The people
right.
who
Like
got booted
you
were the people
were.
that CV found.
That's a great point. But just that was a recurring piece, especially as
Hmm.
you heard from those Lucy's, and I was like, oh, this is a side of Walt I hadn't seen before, which I think it humanized him a little more
Yeah.
in a way for me, which I appreciated. So overall, very interesting read. Maybe not what we thought we were getting into when we put it on our wish list way back in
But we learned a
in
lot.
2019, but I'm glad that we could finally get to it as part of this celebratory summer series. We will, of course, leave our listeners with resources that we felt were connected to this book. My brain went to the One Day at Disney documentary shorts on Disney Plus. These premiered in 2019, and each episode was filmed on the same day and highlights cast members in their unique roles with the company, all the way from Bob Iger to performers in the Finding Nemo musical at Animal Kingdom, really just across all facets of the company. So I felt like that got to the same kind of heart and vibe that this book was getting to, of the people behind the magic.
Two, I wanted to mention our memoirs from Theme Park Press. If you're interested in diving a little deeper into two 55ers who did end up with windows on Main Street, from Jungle Cruise Skipper to Disney Legend, 40 Years of Magical Memories at Disney by William Sully Sullivan, as well as from Disneyland's Tom Sawyer to Disney Legend, The Adventures of Tom Nabby, which we had reviewed on a previous summer series. When we looked at Disney Legends. That is episode 78 if you also want to read the book and then listen to our review. But if you want to dive a little deeper, there are quite a few memoirs out there of 55ers who can tell you more about their full story beyond just their little encyclopedia entry.
Great picks and a nice throwback to another summer series. We will, of course, be continuing our Celebratory Summer Series. In July, we will have an author interview with previous author of the show, Aaron Goldberg, for his book, Presenting Disneyland, Forgotten Photographs from Opening Day, which includes a foreword by Bob Gurr. Excited to hear about that. But here's a quick description of that book. Presenting Disneyland features never-before-seen color images captured by a Disney studio employee, an invited guest of Disneyland on the day it was introduced to the world. This remarkable first-hand glimpse provides numerous candid behind-the-scenes photos of Walt Disney and his new theme park as they prepared for their television and in-person debut. Previously lost to the decades, these photographs provide a visual history of the celebrity attendees' infamous test wall before it made its way into the park, and overall excitement of what it was like to be in attendance at Disneyland on July 17th, 1955. Very fitting pick for July. And we will wrap up this series in August with The Happiest Place on Earth, The Incredible Story of Walt Disney's Disneyland by Don Hahn and Christopher Merritt, forward by Bob Iger. We were happy to receive this as D23 members within our membership package there. I think we might have an exclusive cover, but the book is more widely available to celebrate Disneyland's 70th this summer. In the meantime, you can, of course, keep up with Book of the Mouse Club on Instagram at Book of the Mouse. Email us with comments or ideas to bookofthemouseclub@gmail.com. Please leave us a review wherever you listen so others can find our podcast to read and listen along with us. You can keep up with me, Courtney, on Instagram at Great Gutsby.
And me, Emily, on Instagram at Emily_McD. And Courtney, I picked the quote last time, so it's your turn to close us out.
Yeah, there is really only one quote that I had to do here. It is often debated whether Walt said this himself, but it is on a door on Main Street, USA in Disneyland. It is on a door on Main Street, USA in Walt Disney World, and that is a door or window, so to speak, dedicated to all of the cast members with the following quote: "You can design and create and build the most wonderful place in the world, but it takes people to make the dream a reality." And to me, that is the thesis of this book.
Absolutely. Well, we're looking forward to having you all join us for the rest of our summer series, and we'll see you in Disneyland.
Book of the Mouse Club has no affiliation with the Walt Disney Company. The views and opinions expressed by hosts and participants are theirs and theirs alone. They do not represent the organizations or companies they happen to work for.